the other one, you bastard!
Yes, I timed this to match up with the Netflix series. It's free publicity, and I was going to review them anyway.
Algorithms! Math!
When you really think about it, the new Netflix series is very similar to Car Robots, Robots in Disguise, the 2001 show. Hasbro needed a brand new show without making new molds for it, so they pulled existing molds and they repainted them to the highest quality. And you know what? It's working incredibly well. Not only are these amazing toys to begin with, but the paintwork is truly exceptional. And on top of that, these are selling to a ridiculous degree. However, in a line of repaints, there's always going to be that one figure that they probably should have skipped. Now, in the original run of Siege last year, there was one figure I absolutely refused to get, and that was Mirage. No matter how much I looked at it in the renders, in the physical stock photos, and even in person, it always looked incredibly off. However, against my better judgment, the Netflix toys were on the shelf and I decided to make an impulse purchase. And that was a bit of a mistake. So let's wallow in my disappointment towards said mistake. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Netflix War for Cybertron Trilogy Deluxe Class Mirage. They are Netflix toys, not War for Cybertron toys. The wiki has it wrong. Just get over it. Now, for those who keep up with this channel to a certain extent, you'll know that I only just recently covered another Mirage alike, and I ultimately came to the conclusion that Mirage is a very difficult character to get right in plastic form. It's not impossible, but I yearned for another attempt from another company. Unfortunately, this is clearly not the poster child for the character, because in vehicle mode, damn, this is disappointing. I mean, come on, it's so nearly there. There's a lot to like here, but it gets bogged down by one glaring issue. Right off the bat, though, the paint is done utterly amazingly. Netflix toys have a sort of half spray effects going on with them, and although they don't go all out with all of the toys, in pretty much every instance of the Siege wave, it's done insanely well. The front section does have unpainted grey plastic on show, but you barely notice it, thanks to the blue fade, as well as tamper-graphed black smudges. Once again, I'll die on the battle damage hill. This effect continues to be as awesome as ever. The black returns on the spoiler section, which also has a blue spray effect, as well as extra purple on the edges. Like, Jesus, we don't just have 2 layers of paint here, but tamper-graphs as well. The subtle sculpting also works remarkably well, slightly reminding me of typical Gundam shield designs in the adding of tiny vents. It also works incredibly well with the profile of the vehicle mode. The way the legs have folded up is masterfully done, although that does come with a cost later on, but for now we need to stay positive. I love how they've painted the driver section in gunmetal. It strikes a lovely balance of being just Cybertronian enough whilst still echoing something you'd find on Earth. It doesn't look like anyone would drive in this, but it matches what's typically seen on the character. And surprisingly, whilst they reuse the gunmetal on the feet on the sides, which do a great job of blending in on said sides, they haven't done so on the wheels. Instead, they've got dedicated silver paint, which looks absolutely lovely, and the whole effect is capped off by what I assume is tamper-graphed purple. It honestly baffles me how they're able to make something look this good on a deluxe that costs exactly the same as it would in other lines. I'm not that knowledgeable with how the rest of the world is marketing these, but I do know from discussions with certain Canadians that the Voyagers are at least $20 more than they usually would be. I don't know what the case is in the States though, let alone Asia or Europe. What I do know is that there's been no price increase with these here, which to me is absolutely astonishing. If I had to take a shot in the dark as to how they're able to pull this off with such a low price tag, I suppose it's to do with the production of designing the molds themselves. When you factor in research, CAD design, prototyping, and molds production, typically it costs up to 100,000 USD to produce just one simple deluxe mold, which I suppose is chump change unless a toy shelf warms so hard the store setup increases by 15 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit, all my homies hate Fahrenheit. Now with the molds already produced and having a line comprised entirely of repaints, I imagine they have much more wiggle room to work with in terms of deco budget. Come to think of it, it's probably why Robots in Disguise 2001 toys had such amazing decos back in the day. As a result, any figure you get from this line is going to be expertly painted. Unfortunately, the paint is pretty much the only thing this figure has going for it in this mode, because Jesus, what is this spoiler? Oh, hello, Arms, do you come here often? Of course you do, because the designers were on some seriously weird shit at the time. Cybertronian or not, the entire lower half is done expertly, but then you get to the top and the whole thing falls apart. It's only one fault with this particular mode, but I cannot stress how much it brings the figure down as a whole. Beautiful, ugly. Beautiful, ugly as shit. Now granted, this did end up looking way worse on the original version, which is one of the reasons I flat out refused to purchase any version until now. Unfortunately, the paint doesn't help mask this. In fact, I go as far as saying it's ultimately worse than the Iron Factory version. I realize I had a lot more to say about that one because there were several issues that combined into a deeply disappointing alt mode overall. However, even with all those issues stacked up, I still think that this one poor design choice is worse as far as vehicle modes are concerned. It remains to be seen which one is worse overall, but yeah, for now, I'll gladly take a USB stick on wheels over a giant knife with a tumor. Although at least the weapon storage is passable, he comes with 3 guns, and although they're meant to combine in this specific way, you do get a few mix and match options. Well, it's just one mix and match option, but you get the idea. Plugged in, they don't look too bad. I suppose they turn this deeply disappointing spoiler into an artillery platform of sorts, and to some that may excuse the design in the end, but to me, I'm sorry, it just doesn't. But before we go on, no, I don't find the faux chest section at the back that much of an issue. Yeah, it's a smidge unsightly if you squinted it for too long, but for the most part it keeps to itself and doesn't interrupt the flow. At least to the same extent as the spoiler. F the spoiler, and did I mention f the spoiler? I also like that they've molded vents into the back here. They aren't painted, and as far as I can gather, neither were the originals, but it's a neat feature nonetheless. Ultimately though, a couple of vents can't save this design. Let's face it, this is bad. Not downright awful, but still your run-of-the-mill average bad. It didn't have to be bad, they only had one tiny issue to fix, but it's such a prominent issue that any hope this vehicle mode had is cast aside, stomped on, and buried in a shallow grave. I suppose at the very least he isn't ridiculously tiny, as some people would prefer him to be. His size does work quite well as far as I'm concerned. You can also kind of do the Optimus thing where the wheels fold down for a hovercraft mode, but honestly it looks pretty stupid. I find it hilarious how this was marketed as a thing and then suddenly it wasn't. My guess is the designers were fan moding it one day and then decided to make it a documented feature until the higher ups told them it was stupid. Rightfully so, mind you. That's just a guess though. If you have a 5mm peg stand, I suppose you could plug it in that way, but honestly I don't think it's worth it. It's a stupid figure that should be ignored, and thankfully it doesn't impact the rest of the figure. Oh no, we've got other ways of impacting that. Case in point, the transformation is just bad. Not from a functional level, but just from a tactile one. It's not fun, it's clunky, there are parts going all over the place, and it just feels incredibly off. Many of the Siege transformations are incredibly addictive. You go back and forth instantly, and you can't stop doing it. But Mirage, well, I just don't want to do it. But it does work, but it definitely doesn't have that effortless charm. First thing you want to do is untab the 2 spoiler sections and bring them up, just for now. That'll give you clearance to unpeg the arms from there. Take the entire chest section at the back and untab it there, and look at that, you got a triple hinge. Oh boy, I just love these! Now that's not really being fair. These can be done quite well if they're nice and solid, but this just isn't solid. It feels less like Earthrise grapple and more like Magic Square Artfire. You want to take the head out of there. It doesn't lock into place, just kind of sits there. Come to the front of the car and fold the wheels down. That'll actually probably untab those in the process. If you haven't untabbed them, and then you come around here and you bring these all the way in and all the way around. Untab these just a little bit and bring them out. That'll give you access to the foot. Then collapse the entire leg together and do the same on the other side. Then you come around to the front and you rotate the legs into place. Then you take the triple hinge and you click it all into place, and that'll actually stop the head from going down as well. Wheels untab and then they fold into place, but they don't actually lock into place. They just kind of sit there, which is a bit annoying. Then you take the arms and you peg them back into there. These actually do peg into place, fortunately. Bring the shoulders and the elbows and the shoulder pads into position, like so. And last but not least, you bring out the fists. So yeah, everything works, everything functions, but it's just not fun, especially in the legs, especially in the awful legs. They're just an absolute joke. And then there's a triple hinge on the backpack. Yeah, it's not a fun transformation. It works, you don't have to worry about pieces not clicking into place or anything like that, but I'd be lying if I said I liked it. And then we get to the robot mode, and by God, they've tried so hard to make this look good, but it's still Siege Mirage, that is to say, poorly designed. Much like the vehicle mode, the presentation surrounding the base mold has been taken up to 11 with absolutely gorgeous paint. Like, holy shit, just look at the amount of paint added to the chest. Blue fade, purple, gunmetal details, Decepticon— oh, right, I suppose I should talk about that. Many people have criticized this figure not just for its bonkers color scheme, but its wacky concept. The fact that Mirage shouldn't be a Decepticon, even though, it's kind of alluded to on the wiki. Personally, I feel that as its own thing, this color scheme really shines through. I may have ended up liking this even more if he got a new head sculpt, but let's put that aside for a bit because for now, I need to stay positive. Yes, Doc, stay positive. If there's one thing I will absolutely give them credit for, it's the plastic molding they chose. For newcomers, this might not seem like such a big deal, but for those who've seen the original mold, they had the ridiculously stupid idea of casting the shin sections in clear blue plastic. Who the f thought that was a good idea? Oh yeah, sure, I love exploding knees. Whatever remains to be said about the rest of the robot mode, at least these are now done in medium grey, and I'm not just talking about the shitty Games Workshop grey, oh no. This time it actually has a rather nice shine to it. That's not to say Games Workshop grey doesn't appear on this figure at all, but fortunately the only case I can see here has already been covered up by the immaculate paint. Once again, the paint budget went all out. Unfortunately, it's still attached to a pretty disappointing mold. In fact, it's the same circumstance that plagued the vehicle mode. It's done extremely well except for one small small section.
Look at the legs! Look at the legs!
It's one thing to have fully filled in legs, it's another to have them hollow from the back. But kibble hanging off? Why would you do that? This decision seems so baffling, especially when they've ended up molding in faux parts for the chest over here. The parts were already there, especially since they wanted a wider chest. But this is ridiculously stupid. It would have been fine if they folded up into the backpack, but you don't put kibble on the backs of the legs. That right there is a cardinal sin of Transformers engineering, and it just ends up messing with the weight of the figure. In fact, it's a miracle this guy stands so well, given his tiny ass feet. And what's the point? So the backpack can look completely clean? Well, it's completely pointless if the legs are like this. And yes, no one's going to display their figures from the back, but at least with a bulky backpack, you can hide it from frontal poses. Here, you try anything dynamic and you get the messiness from the side. Seriously, give me leg hollowness over this any day. And they're not particularly solid either. They can hold a pose fine, but the wheel sections themselves don't lock in anywhere. Fortunately, the shin sections do, but they don't line up properly, and you're just left with these ugly seam lines that have been left behind. Now, yes, it is better than the original, as not only was the clear blue plastic worrisome in terms of longevity, but it also drew your attention to it a lot more. I have to give credit to the deco designers here, as the new plastic doesn't just hide it well, but the expertly done tamper graphs draw your attention away from it. But even so, these legs are incredibly unsightly. Much like the vehicle mode, the entire robot mode is brought down by one stupid flaw. It's so close, yet so far. But I suppose I should discuss the other flaws that many consider this figure to hold, although I don't really consider it as such. So let's take a look at Iron Factory Mirage, and I hope you'll appreciate me doing this because of his nightmare transformation. Let's take a look at his proportions. He's a rather slender fellow with some rather expressive tooling, even if the figure is a bit shit. Now, comparing these two, you don't really see a correlation. The head sculpt is clearly Mirage, and it manages to capture his likeness even in the new colors, at least more so than the Iron Factory one. I do find it quite humorous that he managed to get the yellow eye treatment and Optimus didn't though. But you take a look at everything else, like the chest and the arms, and they just don't match up at all. The tooling is there, but the proportions are completely different. Do I personally care? No, Generations is a line that updates characters for the modern era, as opposed to just making G1 versions with articulation. Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up! I never took issue with this deviation, although I'd be lying if I said that there weren't many who did, especially with a shifting focus to more G1 designs, which has thankfully run its course this year as we move into the often neglected territory for the next.
I'm talking, you know, that kind of bestiality.
Mirage's girth has many fans frustrated to be sure, but honestly I don't mind it. Especially with the new color scheme, I'm seeing this as its own thing as opposed to just being a straight retelling of the G1 iteration. And hey, if you really want a thinner Mirage, there's always the classics version. But no, apparently neither of those are worthy for the character for some reason. Personally, I don't get it, but whatever. Ultimately, that's not what makes me dislike this figure though. It's plain and simple. It's those legs. They just aren't good. Sometimes it doesn't take a billion issues to bring a figure down. It only takes one. Now, his articulation is pretty damn good in some areas, and pretty lackluster in others. I especially love the extra shoulder joints facilitated by the transformation, but the hips and the thighs just don't get you as much as you'd hope due to the way everything fumbles around. I also feel that in spite of the leg kibble, the knee should have been able to get just a tiny bit more, but alas, that's just one of the many issues with the transformation. The feet are a bit lackluster as well, although their stability is greatly appreciated. Still, I feel that in the end, it's just not as solid as other members in the line. Many deluxes from Siege have done a lot more with a lot less. It's as if they tried to do a bunch of unique things with this figure, but unfortunately not a lot of them worked out. The design is clearly bit off more than they could chew. Also, let me know in the comments what you think of this new articulation style. I thought I'd try something new. If you don't like it, I'll just go back to what I was doing earlier. Weapons-wise, once again, they've gone for the old G1 way of doing things. The handgun works well enough, but the shoulder missile is a little disappointing. In one configuration, it's far too long, whereas in the other, it's far too short. A middle ground between the two would have been perfect, but I suppose they just didn't have the foresight for that. And size-wise, he's average in terms of height, but his width is definitely more pronounced than even some of his chunkier line mates. It's definitely a bizarre thing seeing Mirage like this, let alone in these colors, awesome or no. But again, that's not something I take issue with, and ultimately, that's what makes this figure so difficult to develop a diagnosis for. Both modes are very close to being awesome, but there's that one issue that consistently gets in the way. I can tell the Netflix team have put a lot of love and care into bringing this to life, to the point where this is one of the few things I'm actually excited to see in the upcoming show. At the time of this particular video's production, the show hasn't come out, and I have no clue whether it's going to be good or not. All I know is that several of the toys are amazing, and this toy could have been as amazing as those, but alas, it just fell a little short. So as difficult as it is to score this figure, there is one thing for certain. I straight up don't like it. I like a lot of things about it, such as the gorgeous paint and the amazing articulation from this section up. But in the end, that one flaw there just completely ruins it for me. However, if we're going for a categorical score, well, I can't really give him anything lower than a 3, and there are two reasons for that. The first, well, that's to do with this other Mirage that I've reviewed previously, in fact quite recently. This thing is rubbish, absolute rubbish, and in comparison, yeah, this does deserve a higher score. And secondly, it is still only one major flaw per mode and a very disappointing transformation between them. It is not a structurally terrible figure, whereas this one completely was. I would still recommend any other Siege Netflix series over this aside from Hounds due to the neck breakage, but at the end of the day, he's not an absolute stinker, but he is disappointing. However, if this, Six Gun, and Cog are the only truly disappointing figures of the Siege line, then damn, what an amazing line it was.